So, hi students, Computer Application in Business, and this is for the program Bachelor of Commerce, subject CAB, semester 5th semester, comes under the Karnataka University Dharwad, session number 15. Learning objectives. In the learning objectives we come across data models. We will learn about the different types of data models associated with the database management system, the pros and cons of the data models, and the outcomes of this session are evolution of data models, how the data models are evolved over the period of time. Evolution of data models, the timeline. In the 1960s we are having the file based system, the flat file based system that we already learned in the session number 13. Okay, so in the 1960s to 1970s we come across another type of data model called as hierarchical data model. Then we come across network data model in the 1970s, and in 1980s we come across the most popular relational data model and entity relationship data models. In 1990 we come across object oriented data model. In 2000 we have web based data models. So this is the evolution of data models with respect to data models. Next we come across hierarchical data model. Background: developed to manage a large amount of data for complex manufacturing projects. So the hierarchical database model is used to manage the large amount of data and which are complex in nature, and that type of data can be handled using hierarchical data model. Example: information management system, IMS. It is an example of the hierarchical database model. Hierarchical database model assumes the data relationships are hierarchical in nature from top to bottom, and one to many relationships are possible in hierarchical database. Each parent can have many children. Each child has only one parent. The logical represented by upside down tree. The hierarchical database model is similar to the tree, where the tree is containing only root and stem, and it is divided into several branches, right? So there is a one root, and that root will continue to the stem, and stem will lead to the several branches. Likewise, it will be having one to many relationships. Okay, so each parent can have many children. The parent can have many number of children, but each child in that tree should be able to have only one parent, and that is the feature of the hierarchical database. In the hierarchical database example, we come across the final assembly. We will take one organization, that is final assembly, which is going to be happened at the root segment. Component A, component B, component C. In the level 1 segments we are having the component A, component B, component C. The parent for this component A, component B, component C is final assembly. In the level 2 segments, component A having assembly A, and component B is not having anything, and the component C is having assembly B and assembly C. Okay, in turn the assembly A at the level 3 segments containing the part A and part B, and assembly B containing the part C and part D and part E, and assembly containing nothing. So that is all about the hierarchical database. Next, hierarchical database pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages. Conceptual simplicity. Groups of data could be related to each other. Related data could be viewed together. That means the data, whatever that you are going to store in the hierarchical database, should be having simplicity in nature. Centralization of data. As you know that every data will be controlled at the top. So that's why it is having a centralization of data will be occurs in the hierarchical database. That is one of the advantages. Disadvantages: the limited representation of data relationships. As we come across, there are types of relationships are there. That is 1 to 1, 1 to m, m to 1, and m to m. These are the types of relationships, but it does not allow m to n or m to m. Many to many relationships will not be allowed in the hierarchical database. because it is specifically meant for representing the relationship of the type 1 to m. So 1 to 1 can be represented, 1 to m can be represented, but it cannot able to represent m to m or m to n. That is the drawback of using the hierarchical database. Complex implementation and structural dependencies. Data access requires the physical storage path. Lack of standards and limited portability. These are the drawbacks of the hierarchical database model. Moving on to the next database model, that is network database model. The objectives of the network database model is to represent more complex data relationships. That means in the hierarchical data model, it can capable of representing only 1 to m relationships. Apart from that, m to m and m to n relationship can also be represented by using this network database model. Network database model, similar to the hierarchical data model, records linked by the pointers. Here the pointers are used to represent the different records, composed of sets. Each set consists of owner, the parent, and the member, the child. Similarly, as we discussed in the previous session, previous slide itself, in the hierarchical we are having a one root. A root is called as a parent, and that member comes under the root is called as the child. Likewise, in also here also in the network database also we are having the parent and the child. And here one of the feature of the network database model is that it will represent m to n relationships that can be represented here. Network database example. Let us consider the sales representatives. The invoice is there, customer, payment, product, and invoice line. Now, in between the invoice and the sales representative, one sales representative can able to have a many number of invoices. Okay. Then many number of customers can able to have a one invoice. Sales set, payment set, 1 to m payment, and 1 to m inventory set and line set. This is how the network database will work. So basically it is capable of representing 1 to 1 to m and m to m relations also. Network database pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages. More data relationship types. Advantages of the network database model are more data relationships can be represented here. More efficient and flexible data access that can be achieved. Network versus tree path is traversal. Enhanced database administration and portability. Disadvantages: system complexity, lack of structural independence. Small structural changes require a significant program changes with respect to network database model. These are the disadvantages of the network database model. So next we come across the relational database model. The problems with the legacy of database systems required excessive effort to maintain, hard to manipulate by end users. Evolution in data organization. EF code relational data model proposal separated the notation of physical representation machine view from the logical representation, that is human view. Relational database model, dominant database model of today. And in the relational database model, it will be concerned about how actually the data will be stored inside the database management system. The data model is nothing but how actually the data will be stored in the database. So to store the data inside the database, we are having several models. Inside the several models we come across, it might be network model, it might be hierarchical model, or it might be relational model. In the relational model, the data will be stored in the form of tables, where each table will be divided into rows and columns. The rows are called as tupules and the columns are called as attributes. So a table might able to contain any number of attributes and any number of tupules. The attributes represent the properties on the particular table. So in the relational database example, it gives, you can see that the customer ID, customer account, and agent ID. So that is the table. So customer ID is the attribute, customer account is the attribute, and the agent ID is also attribute. 1224 455623. It is the one that particular the data present in the row is called as a tupule. 1225 4556 and 25. The second row in the first table will be called as a tupule. So one table might able to contain many number of tuples and many number of attributes, and that is all about the relational database model. In relational database model, pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages. It is a structural independence. The structural independence is not at all available in network database model. It can be overcome by using the relational data model. Separation of database design and physical data storage access. That is very important. And add a query capability with a large structured query language support is available with respect to relational database model. Disadvantages of the relational database model are substantial hardware and system software overhead, more complex system, poor design and implementation is made easy, ease of use allows careless use of DBMS, RDBMS, that is relational database management system. So these are all the different disadvantages of the relational database management system. Then we come across entity relationship model. Peter Chan's landmark paper in 1976, the relationship model toward a unified view of data, the graphical representation of entities and their relationships. And this model is called as the ER model. ER model is nothing but entity relationship model based on the entity attributes and the relationships. The ER concepts. In the ER concepts, entity is nothing but it is a real world thing which is available in this physical world. It might be a table, it might be a computer, it might be a human, it might be a tree, it might be a bike, car, whatever it is, it must be available physically, and that is called as an entity. For example, employee, teacher, student, table, bottle, pen, paper. Therefore, these are all the entities. So, attributes. Attributes represents the characteristics or the properties of an entity is called as attributes. For example, let us take the employee as an entity. For that employee, the employee contains SSN. SSN means social security number, last name, first name, middle name, age, designation, name of the organization, age, phone number, email ID. These are all the properties of the employee. And the relationships describes the associations between the entities. So these relationships will be able to establish the relationship in between the entities and among several relationship also. And these relationships can be of the type of 1 to M, 1 to 1, 1 to N to M to N. So these are the types of the relationship that can be established with respect to ER concepts. Complements the relational data model concepts, help to visualize the structure and content of the data groups. Entity is mapped to relational table represented in the ERD, that is entity relationship diagram. ER diagram Chen model. So here the entity will be represented by the rectangle, whereas the relationship will be represented by the diamond symbol, and the relationship will be established by drawing the lines, straight lines in between the two entities. Entities, relationships and connectivities. So entity is represented by the rectangle with its name in the capital letters. Relationships represented by an active or passive verb inside the diamond that connects the related entities, and the connectives, the types of relationship written next to each other. So basically 1 to M, M to N and 1 to 1 relationship. Next we come across the ER diagram, another type of model called as the Krauss Foot model. Entity, relationship, connectives. Here the everything is same, but instead of representing the diamond's shape for relationship, it will be represented by the active or passive verb. So that is the major difference. And the connect is also represented by two vertical lines for one and the Krauss Foot for gem. And that is the major difference between the Krauss Foot model and Chen's model of representing the ER diagram. In the ER diagram, pros and cons. Advantages: exceptional conceptual simplicity, easily viewed and institute representation of data, facilitates database design and management, integration with relational database model, enables better database design via conceptual model. Disadvantages: incomplete model of it on its own, limited representational power, cannot model data constraints not right to entity relationships, example attribute constraints, cannot represent relationship between the attributes within the entities, no data manipulation language SQL, loss of information content, or to include the attributes in the ERD. Object-oriented database. Object-oriented database concepts become popular in the 1990s. Ability to handle the most complex data types such as multimedia data. Object-oriented database model OODBM maintains the advantages of ER diagram model but adds more further features such as object. Object is equal to entity plus relationship. So between and within the entity, that will be called as an object. A class is a collection of similar objects with shared attributes and methods. Example, employee is the class, employee 1, object 1, employee 2, object. So on, we can able to have many number of objects. Organized into the class hierarchy, incorporates the notation of inheritance. Attributes and methods of the class are inherited by its descendant classes. Object-oriented database, pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages. Semantic representation of data, fuller and more meaningful description of data via objects, modularity, reusability, inheritance, ability to handle the complex data, sophisticated data requirements. These are the different advantages or the pros of the object-oriented model. Disadvantages: lack of standards, complex navigational data access, steep learning curve, more system-oriented than user-oriented, high system overhead, and slow transactions. These are all the disadvantages of the object-oriented database model. Web-based data model. Internet is emerging as the prime business tool. Shift away from the model's example relational versus object-oriented, emphasis on interfacing with the internet. The characteristics of internet age databases are flexible, efficient, secure, and internet access, support more complex data types and relationships, seamless interfaces with multiple data sources and structures, ease of use for end users, database architect, and database administrators, simplicity of conceptual database model, many database design, implementation, and application development tools, and powerful database management systems and graphical user interfaces. Questions. In these question sections, you will be asked about 10 or 15 marks questions. Define data model and explain briefly about the different types of data models. These are the references. You can also learn for additional information for this particular session. Thank you.